Please join me in welcoming Adelle Goodman, travel animal rescue, for a chat about her amazing work around the world supporting local TNR groups. More of that shortly, but first, Adelle, can you tell us a bit about yourself and your background and how you came to be involved in cat population management and the kind of things you do on a day-to-day basis?
Sure. So let's see. I grew up in the US, and my parents sort of always encouraged us to travel. They were from England, so sort of instilled that international worldview at a young age, and that led me to want to go to university in New York and try to strike out on my own. But going to university is sort of the time where you start to realize there are so many layers of problems in the world, and it can become quite frustrating and heavy. And so that led me to think about leaving the US and going somewhere else and trying to do something a bit more meaningful. I left the US. I went to Cambodia and Vietnam for 2 years. Absolutely amazing places, would highly recommend to anybody. And I was really just searching for something meaningful to do. I found the country's only proper farm animal sanctuary. So they had dogs, cats, 2 of the biggest pigs you've ever seen, chickens, and some hedgehogs. And so I was working in rescue and sheltering for about 6 months. And as you do, I came across many pretty scary complications. The founder of the sanctuary describes rescue work as watching preventable suffering and death, because there is so much around you all the time, and sometimes so little impact you can have. So it was really, really meaningful. I had found meaning, but I realized that just doing rescue and shelter was sort of a band-aid solution to the core problem of why rescue is even necessary. So Kat Besh, the founder, she has decades of experience in this work, and she shared with me everything that she's learned. All of the reasons why this suffering and need for rescue exists. In Vietnam, a lack of resources, a lack of adequate veterinary medicine, adoptable homes, international support. There's so many limitations. So she knew that prevention was the key, and she passed that lesson on to me. Rescue started to feel really futile. Obviously, I still work in rescue. I still support the sanctuary and others, but she kind of inspired in me a desire for prevention instead of responding to the suffering. So I set out to travel beyond Vietnam, and I kind of just decided to just start grabbing and neutering cats as I found them in my travels.
This is amazing. I'm so pleased that when you wanted to make a difference, you decided to focus on cats. It's really great. And after your time in Cambodia and Vietnam, you did travel quite extensively with very much this idea of trying to get this preventative message across rather than just dealing with the consequences of the problem. So it's all about this neutering, this TNR. Yeah. And I wonder whether you'd share some of your experiences with us, and maybe we'll do it like a trip around the world to different countries that you've worked in, just so that we can get a taste of the diversity that exists with the challenges that people face with cat population management. So if we sort of start in the Balkans and then we'll work our way south. Now, I know you've worked in Bosnia, Herzegovina, Serbia, Albania, and also Montenegro, and we've actually featured Kotor kitties who work very successfully in Montenegro in one of our previous newsletters. So what can you tell us about the TNR projects there?
Sure. There's a lot, so I'll try to summarize, but each situation is totally unique in their assets and challenges. So obviously, I want to acknowledge that my experience is colored by being a foreigner in these places, and a lot of the challenges that exist, there's layers of social, economic, and political complexities, and I just have a very small window. So I will never be the authority on these. The groups that work there are for sure the authorities more than me. But let's see. So the first place I went to was Albania. And within days, I had found my first cat who needed to be neutered. His name was Leo. He's a tiny little leopard. And I kind of just, he was friendly enough to just push him into a carrier without a trap, which actually a lot of people in this region do. They just trap with cat carriers. So yeah, I got him in the carrier. I Googled a vet. I walked there myself because no taxi would pick us up. I spent way more on his neuter and recovery and boarding because I didn't know what I was doing. The whole lot. But he was neutered and had his vaccines, and I sent him on his way, and I felt really encouraged. But I didn't really know what to do next. So I looked for shelters. I found Animal Rescue Albania. I think they're one of the biggest ones there that are non-municipal. I visited them. They were incredibly kind and generous and showed me around, and I met all the dogs. But once again, they were deprived of all the resources they needed in order to rescue indefinitely. They don't have the outgoing animals and adoptions, and they don't have the ongoing financial support. So back to TNR, right? So I kind of had my second big lesson. After that, Leo went well. He was neutered, he was fine. But then I met a really sick cat just sitting outside of a cafe. I didn't think, I just grabbed him and took him to the vet, as we do. He recovered, he got his vaccines, and when he was well enough, I put his caretaker in contact with the vet. I negotiated the price. She said, you can take him to get neutered, and then full circle, right? Everything will be fine with this cat once he's neutered. And the caretaker said no. And I realized that I had just rehabilitated a cat, a healthy cat who was going to go on to reproduce and contribute to the exact problem that I was trying to fix. So yeah, I realized I couldn't do that anymore, and I really just had to focus on the TNR. The next place I went to was Montenegro, and that was a radically different experience because TNR is ongoing with Kotor kitties at the forefront, as you know. And they have a structure for TNR in place. They have the vets, they have the traps, they have the support of locals who monitor the cats, but they're still up against a huge challenge of the low number of cats who are being sterilized outside of their work. So there is this ongoing problem of cats being abandoned in the old town where they mostly have sterilized the cats and new kittens showing up, and they're really, really on the way, and they're doing huge work. I mean, they've sterilized like 7,000 cats so far, and it's just been a few years. But it seems like the biggest challenges here are a lack of financial support by the government. There is a lack of normalization of sterilization as the solution, and access to vets who are doing it. There's also a big lack of year-round hands-on support for the trapping and transportation. There seems to be a mix of public disinterest and, of course, sometimes viewing the cats as pests. And also, there's occasionally an objection to spay aborts by the veterinarians themselves. So that can be the challenge. But they've done a ton of education work there, and public opinion is changing. So it's a really, really unique place that I found. I think the only other big thing of note right now is that abandonment is still very, very common. And Kotor Kitties gets, endless messages of tourists who are there on vacation, but they found these kittens by the dumpster and they don't know what to do. They can't take them home, right? And the added layer that Kotor Kitties is not a shelter, and municipal shelters can sometimes be really awful for animals. So once again, rescue and shelter is not the solution, and TNR seems to be where we should focus.
It's really interesting, isn't it? Because you've just highlighted something that always strikes me. It's the TNR is a part of the whole puzzle. You also have to change the attitude of owners that sterilization is the norm, is the way to go, and to address issues of abandonment, because it's a joint effort, isn't it? You can do so much with a TNR project, but you've always got these other complications coming in as well. I know you've also worked in Greece, haven't you? How did you find that?
Yeah, so Greece is the place that I go back to. I usually don't return to a place more than once, but it's really great. I mean, it has one of the most successful and coordinated high volume spay neuter that I've seen. Being a part of Europe, a part of the European Union, could have to do with more resources in order to do the work. But there's just so many people that are doing the work. There are, big registered groups. Nine Lives Greece is one that I work with. Oyat Despotes is another one that does a lot of sterilization. But there are also like an endless number of individuals who are just sterilizing their own community cats, either with the charities or on their own. And yeah, it's really just overwhelming. They're really well connected. They communicate a lot. They work together. But even with all of these resources and support, the number of cats there is just outstanding. I mean, we're talking like anywhere from between 20 to 100 unsterilized cats within 2 blocks of your house.
Wow.
The city of Athens is huge. A massive percentage of the population of Greece lives in Athens, and therefore so do the cats. A lot of the work is focused on the center of Athens, as well as the islands. This is where a lot of the tourists go, and this is a common factor across all of the places I've been, whose economies are either semi-dependent or fully dependent on tourism, right? So the tourists call about the cats, the TNR is done where the tourists are, the government cares about tourism continuing, so funding continues in those areas, even though there's an equal need in other areas outside of the central parts. But again, these volunteers and these individuals are sterilizing their entire areas. There are areas where you won't see a single unsterilized cat, and they're doing a lot of high volume work, but they will still need, this continued support, these continued resources. One big thing of note is access to traps. So, there are multiple organizations who create feral cat, community cat specific traps, which are not, let's say, pest control traps. But in places like Greece or in places like Bosnia and Herzegovina, you can't import a trap from the UK or the US without, let's say, a $300 or $400 customs fee. So it's just completely inaccessible. So either people are trapping in these carriers, like I mentioned, which is not necessarily safe for them or the cats. A lot can go wrong. Or you are purchasing traps from these, again, pest control companies who don't view any animal as someone who, shouldn't get their tail caught under the door or be disposed of. So yeah, this is something that will have to change in the future in order for them to continue to get the equipment they need to continue to do the work that they're doing.
I think sometimes people forget that. They think, well, the cats are there, the people are there to help, but then there is equipment required, and the equipment can be the difference between doing it with good welfare and doing it, that might well cause harm. What about, how did you find it in Japan? Was it very different there?
So two places I haven't been yet, but I have communicated with people doing TNR there, is Japan, and also India. I think India is of note as we go more east. So one is Japan Cat Network. They do TNR, rescue, and obviously a lot more, and they've been doing it for 2 decades. There's also a decently strong animal rights movement there, which is pretty cool. And then in India, the biggest spay and neuter project, I believe, in Delhi is Dogs of Delhi. I know they've done 19,000 dog sterilizations since they began, and they're ongoing. Their surgeries are ongoing every single day, 10, 15 dogs from various areas. They also do a neonatal kitten program. They're really, really vital in the region, but they don't get much government support. So those are 2 that I will love to visit one day, but I haven't been able to get out there yet.
And so, full circle to what you were talking about to start with, Vietnam and Cambodia.
Sure. So when I was in Vietnam and Cambodia, I was just focusing on rescue and sheltering, right? I was learning that side of things. But yeah, I never got a chance to do TNR. It's also just not something that is as present. It's a bit more of a unique situation. There is, of course, need for spay neuter, but there aren't as many homeless animals. Therefore, there aren't that many ongoing mass sterilization programs like they do happen here or there. But I think the biggest factors limiting sterilization here is probably a lack of strays, lack of affordable and high quality veterinary care. And there's also just a radically different attitude towards animals, the land, and survival than we're used to. So yeah, sterilization missions are sometimes held where animals are brought in by their caretakers. They're brought for low-cost surgeries, and it could be a few hundred animals at a time. But there are so many animals who aren't sterilized, who have, let's say, caretakers, whatever that means in Vietnam and Cambodia. So they're just allowed to make babies, or they become sick, or they don't have access to veterinary care, and they don't necessarily go on to become stray, but they are sold to people who take them to the market, and that is a form of culling program that is quite normal. And I think it's important to note that everywhere in the world has culling problems, and a lot of times when we think about dogs and cats going to the market in Vietnam and Cambodia, it's interesting because it's just a different form of culling program, right? Like there are many other places where, let's say, the government issues allowances to go out and shoot badgers or to poison, or abandoning kittens can be viewed as a form of culling. So yeah, it may be sort of like a gut instinct when we come from the West to recoil at the thought of dogs and cats going to the market, but it is simply just another way that killing occurs or death occurs. And I think my time in Southeast Asia really helped inform me to how I may have thought before, right? Like pointing out the dog and cat meat trade there kind of just shows my ethnocentrism in the West and doesn't acknowledge why the animals and people are in the situation in the first place. My feeling about that is not a solution, it's a judgment. And so the solution would be focusing on the reasons why they are all in that situation in the first place. The access to vet care, the normalization of sterilization, things like this.
Yeah. Thank you. That was a quick whizzed around the world, but I think what it's shown to me is how different situations are in different parts of the world, and how people locally view those differences and those challenges. And it's amazing the experience you've had thus far. With regard to TNR projects, often people are working with minimal resources. Do you have any tips for anyone who's currently running or thinking of starting a TNR project locally to where they live?
Well, obviously people who are doing TNR have a lot more experience than me. I've just been doing this for a year, and I've spent short periods of time in each place. But what I have seen across the board is how many people start with the idea of prevention, with the idea of focusing on TNR, who inevitably, it's just an inherent part to the work, end up bogged down in rescue and rehabilitation. And that can be uniquely challenging in these places who don't have as many resources as, let's say, the US, because they're sending animals out of the country to be adopted. And your ability to do that is hugely limited based on so many factors. So yeah, these compassionate people end up, they're just drowning in rescue and suffering from compassion fatigue and, like, frankly, poverty because of the lack of infrastructure. Rescue leading them to poverty and financial instability, because they can't relieve themselves of the financial, physical, and emotional burdens of rescue and shelter and the number of animals in need. Obviously, that's not to say that we should remove rescue from our work, but just kind of always assessing our resources and what we can tangibly do to achieve that initial goal. It's a question I have to ask myself every day, because the nature of my TNR, I live in an area for a short period of time. I sterilize as many cats as I can. I try to meet the caretakers. And then I rely on the caretakers to watch over the colony. I am not their reliable source of food. I am not their reliable source of medical care. So, there's a piece missing for what I do, for what should be done. So every day, because I know at some point I will leave, I have to ask myself, like, what do I have the resources for? How much of my wages can I afford to spend on rehabilitating this cat? Do I even have a cage to rehabilitate them in? Do I have the appropriate housing to rescue an animal? Do I have enough time here to find them a home? There are a lot of challenges that I simply can't overcome. But one thing I try to think about, I just finished reading a book. One of the sanctuaries I work with, they're specifically focused on cats. They operate on Syros Island in Greece. Their name is God's Little People Cat Rescue. I just finished reading her book, and there was a part where she said, let's see, there's a kind of grief in coming to accept you can't save them all. But as it said, it makes all the difference for each little cat you can save. However, it does something to your inner linings when you realize that is the reality you have to accept. No matter how hard you try, you simply cannot save them all, and that begins to create a state of mental toughness. For sure, what's within your power to do, we will do, but you realize you cannot fall apart with each loss, otherwise rescue is not for you.
Wise words from somebody who actually is doing the job. That's amazing. Gosh, thanks, Adelle. Thank you. That it's quite humbling to see what you've achieved in a year, to just get out there and get stuck in, and being so respectful of the local people, and realizing that they're the ones who have the knowledge and will sustain anything that you might start or be involved in. Thank you very much for your time today, and I wish you every success with your work in the future. Thanks, Adelle.